Hello, and welcome to my first video of this type. I'm on a journey to learn how to make a bunch of locations from Sodor, so join me as in this installment, I make Maithwaite. Much like Toby, Maithwaite is my favorite station. Particularly its portrayal in Season 5. There's something about the design of the set matched with the lighting and colors of Season 5 that is really satisfying to my imagination. So I set out to build the set pieces necessary to achieve something similar. Now the set isn't necessarily done. As you've seen, the crossing gates are missing and I need more variety in the foliage, but I was too excited to get this out into the world. So to begin, I focus on the rocks behind the station. I decided to not recreate the ones in the show exactly because I already had some Woodland Scenics rock molds that I really liked the look of and wanted to put to good use. So I started with styrofoam as a base. I used the Tomy station as a guide for roughing out how big the rock face should be. Then I cut the inch-thick sheet of styrofoam into 3 pieces and glued them all together to build up the height. I used weights to hold everything in place as the glue expands while it dries. Then onto the plaster rocks. I had prepared some rocks earlier which I used to block out roughly where I wanted them to go. I decided to trim the sides of the styrofoam block I had made at an angle to give the rock face a slightly more natural shape when viewed from different angles. To make the plaster rocks, I used Woodland Scenics lightweight hydrocal mixed with water until achieving a pancake mix-like consistency. I sprayed down the molds with a mixture of water and a couple drops of dish soap to help the hydrocal mix flow into the fine details of the mold. Once the hydrocal is poured into the mold, I make sure to tap it so everything flows into those details and to avoid air bubbles in the rocks. Then, it's just waiting until they've dried. I just let it dry overnight. Then, onto the part that is still kind of daunting to me, Sculpt-A-Mold. I still have a lot to learn about Sculpt-A-Mold, so the consistency of the plaster and water may have been off as my working time with it was very short. Nevertheless, I started slapping on the Sculpt-A-Mold in sections onto the styrofoam. By the way, you'll notice I added a couple offcuts on the top to help give some height to the rocks which will eventually peek out on top. I add Sculpt-A-Mold and quickly place the rocks in it, smoothing it all down as I go. You'll see here that as I push the rock into the Sculpt-A-Mold, it breaks. This is actually a good thing as it adds more variation to the rocks and it allows for the bigger pieces to fit in better. If anything, I could have done with breaking more rocks and being a bit more free with their placement. I did end up filling the gap a little as at the time I felt it was too obvious, but in retrospect it may not have been necessary. I also used a utensil used for sculpting clay. I don't know what it's called or what it's supposed to be used for as I don't know anything about sculpting clay, but I had it for some reason and so I used it to push the Sculpt-A-Mold around into tight places and to scrape it into rougher, more jagged shapes to get that rocky look. Then it was on to painting. This is where it all kind of went wrong, and I even considered for a moment throwing the whole thing out. I used acrylic paint and water to make some washes, and then using a foam brush, I applied it across the whole thing. I can't tell you what ratios I used of water to paint, as I do not know, and I don't think I did when I mixed them. As a result, the washes were too thin to really give the rock the dark color I was looking for. By the time I went over it with a black wash, it was already obvious to me this wasn't working, and before me, I had a big mess. So I stopped the camera and considered my options. Eventually, I found a different technique that worked better for me, that I understood better. I did not film this though, as I thought this project was a lost cause. So instead, I filmed a small sample to show you all how it works. I used these cheap acrylic paints, but before applying paint, I used a brush to apply lots of water to the rock. Then I got water on the brush and dipped it into gray paint to use as my base. As I apply the paint to the rock, I keep adding water to ensure that the paint flows well into the cracks and crevices. Once I'm happy with the gray layer, I add brown in spots around the rock and use water to essentially push the color around. The water takes care of ensuring a natural look as everything just flows to where it should be. Then I used a spray bottle with a black wash, which again, I don't know the ratio for, but since it's a black wash, it's mostly water and it's a lot more forgiving as I'm just looking to add a little bit of darkness in the deep crevices. I come in with a wet brush to move the black wash around if I think it's a little heavy in places. Really, it's down to taste or what the look you're going for is, regarding how much brown or black or other colors to use. For instance, if you want a darker base color for the rock, you may opt to use less water with the gray paint so that the paint doesn't flow off as much. Finally, I finish off by dry brushing white over the sharp edges of the rock to bring out the highlights on the edges. Ultimately, using this technique, I was able to save the project and get the results I was looking for. It just goes to show that there's no need to panic if something goes wrong, just keep experimenting and trying new things. You may find something that works even better than expected. And even if you feel that you do need to start all over, it's okay, as you've learned something now and you can move forward from that. I plan to keep using this method of painting rocks from now on, at least until I find something even better. Now it's on to the grass sheets. I used a baking sheet with a rectangle of wax paper taped on. I poured a generous amount of Mod Podge onto the wax paper and spread it out. I tried to make sure that the Mod Podge was not too thin in any area, as I think this helps prevent tearing later on. I filled the static grass applicator with a mix of light green and medium green 4mm Woodland Scenics static grass fibers. I placed this metal thing that came with the applicator so that it touches the glue and connect the grounding clip to it. I then turn on the applicator and begin shaking it over the glue. Once the grass covers all the glue, I turn the baking sheet upside down and tap it to get rid of the excess grass. I then come in and sprinkle brown tile grout all around to add some dirt texture. Finally, I spray isopropyl alcohol and then scenic glue over everything to lock it all in. Once it's dry, I carefully peel the grass sheet off the wax paper. Grass sheets like this can be purchased from select retailers online, but I like to make my own. Finally, I'll show how I made the concrete that's behind the station. I used a very thin sheet of styrene and lightly sanded down one side of it. These are the spray paints I used for this, the gray as a base and the heirloom white for added texture. Simply spray solid gray first, then, once it's dry, I come back in with the white and spray from a distance so that the speckles of white land on the gray. You can repeat this step as many times as needed until you get the mix of white and grays you're looking for. Finally, I sprayed a black wash over it, but my spray bottle decided to give me problems, so I ended up just pouring a bit of the wash onto the sheet and then using a paper towel to dab the wash around. That last step would still be done even if the spray bottle had worked. Again, repeat as necessary. So those are the main pieces I made for the Maithwaite set. All of the foliage that's added around and to the rock is Woodland Scenics lichen and bushes, and the trees and ballast are Woodland Scenics as well. I did use a lot of their products here, but there are often alternatives available that'll work just as well. This set is still missing a couple details, but I'm really happy with where it is so far, and I'm really pleased that I kept going even when I thought the rock face was beyond repair. That's the beauty of this. There's so many different ways to make what I've made here, and so many new things to try. I have a lot to learn still, and so I look forward to messing up and learning from those mistakes too. It's just a lot of fun in the end. I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe even learned something too. And by the way, if you saw me doing something horribly wrong or have some suggestions on how I can improve, please let me know in the comments. It'll only help. So thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.